What if what you've been told is your body attacking itself is actually a conditioned rejection of one of the most fundamental aspects of our humanity, that of emotion? In this video, we are going to explore the link between repressed emotion and the symptoms expressed through the body with conditions such as autoimmune disease, chronic fatigue, and fibromyalgia. So, if you have been trying everything possible to address and resolve your symptoms and are spinning your wheels around what steps to take, I hope this video opens up a deeper conversation for you around the deeper energetic and nervous system imprints that can actually exist at the root of these conditions. After experiencing many years of pretty severe autoimmune flares myself and moving through the process of actually being able to resolve those symptoms naturally, as well as supporting others in doing the same, what I have come to see is that when things like diet modification and supplements and similar modifications don't actually address the underlying autoimmune symptoms, it's typically because there is unconscious material that is sitting there below the surface, below the symptoms, that is actually asking to be brought into conscious awareness for processing and transformation. Emotional repression is one of these patterns and roots that I see across the board amongst the women that I support, including myself. And in this video, I'm going to dive in with you why we tend to repress emotion, how you can identify if this is a factor beneath the symptoms that you experience, what happens within the body when emotions are repressed, and how you can start to transform this pattern and in turn your symptoms from the inside out. So let's get into it. So first, why do we begin to repress emotion in the first place? Now, as babies, we are essentially all born in full expression. We scream, we cry, we ask for and even demand what it is that we want. And then somewhere along the lines, something shifts. And that's because we are essentially wired to maintain connection with our caregivers and our community. So when something that we are doing is actually threatening that connection. So perhaps we expressed an emotion and were disapproved of or shamed or punished for it. What can happen over time is that we start to understand that that expression is going to actually result in disconnection with our caregiver, which actually threatens our safety and survival because we are dependent on that caregiver. And so over time, what happens is we start to actually repress that expression instead. There's two important things I want to mention here. The first is that what can happen is that the emotion in and of itself can start to be registered as a threat within our nervous system. And the important thing to understand with this is that this is typically not a conscious process. It's not like we are sitting here consciously choosing to push down or repress or disconnect from emotion. What typically happens is that an emotional current will start to rise below the surface. And because that emotion in and of itself can start to become registered as a threat within our system, typically there is some subconscious pattern that takes over instead. So now let's talk about what this can look like and how to identify if this is a pattern that is relevant for you, because this can look a few different ways. This can look like fully disconnecting from the emotion such that we don't even know that it's there. So dissociating, disconnecting, shutting down. It might also look like speeding up, doing more, keeping busy to not feel that emotion. It can look like going to some sort of coping behavior, such as eating or some sort of substance to not feel that emotion. And it can even look like initiating a fight, blaming, reacting outwards to that emotion. And the important thing is that all of these strategies are often to avoid actually feeling and being with that emotion and actually fully allowing it to move through our system. So for me, being disconnected from my emotions looked like a lot of mental energy. It looked like a lot of analysis, a lot of speeding up and doing more. It looked like a lot of busyness. And without knowing it, I was largely disconnected from how I felt and what I needed and from my body in general. Because the important thing to understand here is that our bodies are the vessels through which emotion is felt. So when we disconnect from emotion, we are also largely disconnecting from our bodies, from our internal signals, and even from our intuition in the process. And we sort of zoom up into this region where we zoom up into the mind. It can look like a lot of mental looping. I often say that overthinking is under feeling, and it can even look like feeling like you are out here, somewhere else other than here. So let's talk about what happens when we do repress emotion, starting with on a physiological level. It takes a lot of energy and creates a lot of tension and stress within our system to actually hold in or repress emotion. And it is one of the most significant contributors to the stress that is linked to so many chronic conditions, including autoimmune flares. And to give you an example of what I mean by this, I invite you to run your own experiment here if it's safe to do so, and simply try to stop feeling everything. Try to stop feeling absolutely everything and notice what happens within your body. When I do this, I notice that I get immediately tense, tight, rigid. I either stop breathing or my breathing goes very shallow. And that tension and rigidity within our body actually translates into stress within our system because it takes a lot of energy to hold emotion in. We're actually restricting the flow of life moving through us. Not only that, but that emotion doesn't actually disappear. It is actually held within our cells, tissues, organs, bodies, and nervous system, impacting the functioning of our nervous system and through our nervous system, our immune system, and our digestive system until we actually develop the capacity or create the space to maintain presence with it as it completes its cycle. So there's a couple things I want to point out here. First, the rigidity that comes along with emotional repression is often highly linked to the rigidity within the body when it comes to inflammatory conditions and, in particular, joint pain. And what I've noticed for myself here, because I now know what it feels like to be in a state of emotional fluidity, when I have more emotional material coming up and haven't fully had the space to be with it, I actually notice that my body gets physically tight and achy, whether that be an ache in my neck or more tightness, stiffness, and rigidity in my hips or in my knees, until I'm actually able to create the space to be with what's there and notice what I might be avoiding. And once it's actually moved through, I notice that I actually return to more fluidity within my body. And I actually have a whole video that I will link here that goes into the implication of repressed anger when it comes to inflammation that comes along with so many autoimmune symptoms. Now, I want to talk about a common misconception that I have seen come up amongst the women that I have supported, and that is around what we might refer to as low vibrational emotions. So, if you're not familiar with what I mean by this, you could look up an emotion or vibration scale, and typically what you would see is that emotions such as shame, guilt, fear, anger, sadness are down at the bottom on this scale. And then emotions such as happiness, joy, forgiveness, acceptance, love, gratitude are up there on that scale as being more high vibrational emotions. So, with a lot of the women I've worked with, there is this underlying belief or fear that if I actually feel this lower vibrational emotion, then essentially I'm admitting that it's real and that it exists, and I'm going into that vibrational state. What I have found is that that emotion, whether you are aware of it and allowing it or not, is present. And when we repress or push down those emotions, then it is staying stuck within our vibration, within our field, and within our energetic being. Whereas when we actually allow that emotion to move through us, we are actually not only allowing the emotion to move through and out of our system, but we are actually assimilating the information and feedback that exists within that emotion, which often has the impact of bringing us closer into our truth and disassembling any beliefs that might be involved that are actually sparking that emotion to begin with. And this is really important because when we link this to Dr. Joe Dispenza and his team's work around the field and study of epigenetics and how our internal environment actually dictates whether certain genes are turned on or off, which is really key when you have a family history of these types of conditions. And his work also shows that it is our energetic state of being that allows certain pathology, whether that be viruses, bacteria, or parasites, to actually bind within our system. So when we are repressing or holding in emotions, we are doing just that. We are holding them in to the extent that they are continuing to impact our energetic state, whether we are fully aware of it or not. So it becomes really important to actually allow ourselves the space and to build the capacity to actually be present for what emotions are truly present for us. The other important piece that I want to share around this belief that if I allow myself to feel the emotion, then I'm going to be admitting that it's true and being in this energy and vibration is that oftentimes the emotions that we avoid, we actually recreate in the way that we are avoiding them. So I'll give you an example of what I mean by this. If I often feel unsupported or like I don't matter, I'm probably going to take very different actions than if I didn't feel that way. So, to avoid the potential pain of rejection, if I were to ask for support and not be met for that, I might start to just hold everything myself, not ask for support, not lean on anybody, which is actually going to create more of those feelings of being unsupported and not mattering because I'm holding everything together and not actually asking for what I need. Whereas when we actually allow ourselves to be present with that emotional pain of feeling rejected in our needs or not mattering or not being supported, which is often what creates these patterns to begin with to avoid that emotional pain, we're able to actually transmute that pain, move it through our system and body so that we're no longer holding it anymore and actually start to disassemble that pattern. Because when we're able to be with that emotion, suddenly we start to have more spaciousness and capacity to actually ask for support because we're able to be with the pain of someone not meeting us in general and also without making it mean something about ourselves. So there are all sorts of unconscious energetic patterns like this that typically loop and recreate themselves through the repression of emotion. And it's typically in the pursuit of not losing connection with others that we don't really realize that we lose connection with ourselves in the process. And that was a really significant lesson for me as I started to unravel these patterns and build the capacity to actually be present with the emotions that were present for me, regardless of whether they were uncomfortable or an inconvenience to someone or myself or not. So, now let's talk about what happens on a more broad level when we repress emotion and how to identify yourself in these patterns. So, Emotion is really energy in motion. It is designed to flow through us, to provide feedback and inform us on how it is that we feel in relation to whatever circumstances are occurring within our lives. So, when emotion doesn't actually have the pathway to move through us, we actually lose access to that information, and it can be really, really difficult to discern what our truth is in relation to what is presenting within our lives. So we might lose out on information around what we actually need, what we actually feel, what our opinion is, our true capacity. And this is highly linked to nervous system states such as functional freeze, where we see this disconnect from self, from body, from capacity, and from signals, which can create this pattern of chronic over functioning, overextending, overgiving when we don't necessarily have the connection to our body's signals and energy levels to support that. And in addition to that, when we aren't disconnected to what it is that we are feeling and our bodies, oftentimes what's happening is we are zooming up into the realm of our minds, and our minds are heavily subject to conditioning. And what I've noticed across the board is that typically when the body is expressing through symptoms, and this is not explainable through any sort of other physical factor, it's often because there is some sort of deviation between our truth and the conditioning that we are operating within. So, this can look like a whole lot of I should be doing that and an obligation to do that, and acting based on the conditioning that says who and what we need to be and do in order to earn a sense of enoughness, worth, love, and belonging. So, if I go back to an example for myself, I often had chronic sore throats along with my symptoms. And once I started unpacking these patterns, what I found is that I often wouldn't actually express my truth in terms of how I felt and what I needed out of fear of rejection or criticism. So again, I was avoiding the pain of rejection by not speaking my truth, but also recreating that feeling of rejection because I often didn't feel considered or seen or heard because I wouldn't speak my truth. And that right there is an example of conditioned beliefs that say either it's not safe to express my truth, my emotions or needs are too much, being seen is dangerous. And so when I am going about life operating through that conditioning, that is not in alignment with my truth, because the truth is that it's safe for me to fully express, and my emotions and needs aren't too much in general. Maybe they were too much for certain people, but maybe those people were not my people and couldn't fully receive me. So even though I made these experiences mean something about me and also largely inherited these patterns through my generational lines, this wasn't actually based in truth. So, when I was able to bring that into my conscious awareness and process that underlying energy, the sore throats went away because suddenly I was aware of that deviation between my conditioning and my truth. And actually processing through those emotional states, both in the now and through all the layers of unprocessed emotions in the past, that was the very pathway and gateway to actually resolving the deeper roots of these symptoms. So, with all of this being said, there are various reasons why the repression or holding in or down of emotion can really impact these deeper roots when it comes to the symptoms that we experience, including within and around our experience of stress, our nervous system state, and the underlying patterns that exist below the surface that drive not only our experience of stress within our lives, but these deeper deviations between conditioning and truth that often exist at the root beneath these symptoms. So, if this is resonating with you and you're curious around how you can start to explore and work through these deeper patterns, I invite you to start exploring how you relate to emotion in general, as well as how you relate to certain emotions. A lot of people have an easier time with sadness and a harder time with anger and boundaries, or the reverse, an easier time with anger and a more difficult time expressing sadness and vulnerability. So start to get curious around what is more accessible to you versus what isn't, how your parents and caregivers actually responded to your expression of emotions, how they potentially respond to your children's expression of emotions, and how you actually feel when others express emotions around you. So, noticing what actually triggers you, what creates this visceral reaction within your body, whether that be your own children, that is usually a gold mine to process through any emotions or beliefs around emotions that you may be holding that are often then triggered through their expression of emotion. Or perhaps it's through a partner or a parent and their expression of emotion. Essentially, any area where you may be feeling triggered is a really, really powerful pathway into those underlying emotions that are essentially being triggered through that response within your system. It's also interesting to notice if you feel like you need to justify feeling a certain way, or if you are feeling more low, if you tend to compartmentalize or isolate yourself because you don't want to burden others by seeking support or expressing how you feel. Another way to start opening up the flow of emotion within your system is that when you notice some sort of contrast come up within your life, or something triggering, or something is bothering you or taking you out of ease, to actually get in the habit of journaling out how it is you feel, just to start to get that process of acknowledgement going, whether you can actually connect with the flow of emotion or not, starting to actually consider how it is that you feel, what you might be avoiding, and where that lives within your body. And I actually have a free guided rooting practice that I have linked below that you can utilize to start to explore your relationship with emotion, or start to open up the pathways to emotion simply by taking in a certain circumstance or an emotion in general into that practice and getting curious and just exploring what arises within your body as a result. And if this is resonating and you'd like to go deeper in this exploration, this is exactly what we do within my signature immersion, Rooted, which is designed specifically for mothers experiencing autoimmune or similar systemic symptoms to actually learn how to discern what those deeper roots may be beneath your symptoms, and to equip yourself with an integrated blueprint and roadmap on how to continue addressing those deeper layers going forward, including how to go about actually rebuilding connection and attunement to certain emotions, opening up those pathways so you can actually return to a state of fluidity and ease both within your life and body. I am currently accepting applications for the next intake, and you can find details to check it out and apply below. I would love to hear what resonated with you in the comments below. And if you have any questions, I'm inviting you to subscribe to continue receiving these insights and videos. And I will see you in the next one.